Be me anon, 28 years old, working as a realtor for coming up on 2 years before real estate. I bounced between a couple of jobs that went absolutely nowhere, spent almost a year doing warehouse work right out of school, then did door-to-door sales for a company that sold home security systems. Not glamorous, not even close, but it taught me one genuinely useful thing: how to read people fast and know when to talk and when to shut up. A friend of mine got his real estate license around that time and kept telling me I should try. It said the communication stuff was half the job, and I already had that. I thought about it for a while, then just decided to do it. Took the prep course over about 6 weeks, studied for the exam, failed the math section. The first time sat for it again 2 months later, and found a small local brokerage willing to take on new agents, 8 or 9 agents total, nothing fancy. Not one of the big national brands, just a place that had been operating for over a decade and had a decent reputation. The guy who ran it sat me down on my first day and told me exactly what to expect. Said most new agents quit in the first year because they underestimate how long it takes to build a client base from nothing said. I'd probably make very little for the first 12 months and needed to be at peace with that. I said I was at peace with it. I had some savings, kept my expenses low, drove a beat-up Honda that made a grinding noise when the heat was running, rented a 1-bedroom apartment that was fine, clean, nothing remarkable. I cooked most of my own meals, didn't go out much, didn't need to. I was not interested in impressing anyone. I just wanted to build something that would eventually be worth having. Spent most of that first year doing support work for the senior agents at the office, sitting open houses on weekends, pulling property comparisons for listings, helping with paperwork, did a lot of cold outreach, which is as soul-crushing as everyone says it is. People hang up, don't answer, ask you to stop calling, occasionally yell. I kept doing it anyway. Not because I loved it, but because I understood the logic you put in the calls. Eventually, something sticks got my first solo client near the end of that first year, through a referral from my cousin. A young couple looking for their first home, modest budget, very clear about what they wanted. Showed them maybe 12 houses before we found one that clicked for them. The commission was small, but it felt real, like I'd actually accomplished something that mattered to a real family. That was the signal that told me I was in the right place. The relationship started around the middle of year 1. Met her through mutual friends at a house party. One of those events where the space is full and you end up just talking to whoever is standing near you. She came over and introduced herself and started talking. Almost immediately said she was still annoyed about a meeting she'd had that week, where she felt her ideas were ignored by a male colleague. I said that sounded frustrating. She kept going, gave me the full version of it. I listened, asked a couple of questions, nodded in the right places. She had energy, was clearly smart, and wasn't boring after the work story. She asked what I did. I told her. She said she found real estate interesting because it sits at the intersection of human psychology and market forces. I said, yeah, that's kind of true. She laughed and said, I didn't seem like someone who thought about it in those terms. I said I thought about it, just not in those exact words. We talked for most of that evening, exchanged numbers, texted over the next few days, went out for drinks by our 4th or 5th time hanging out. We were basically a couple. She managed content for a small company, handled their social media accounts, wrote copy, ran some ad campaigns, good at the organizational side of things, from what I could tell. But I got the sense early on that the actual content she made for them bored her. What she cared about was her own personal page. She had an account where she posted about feminism, gender dynamics, systemic issues. Not a massive platform, but a few thousand followers who engaged seriously with what she wrote. Long captions, research-heavy posts, serious topics. She treated it like a project she cared about, more than her actual job. She'd spend evenings writing and rewriting things for that page while the company content was done in an hour. I didn't have strong feelings about the subject matter. I knew the general landscape of those conversations just from existing online, but wasn't particularly invested when she brought things up. I'd listen, ask something to show I was paying attention, not push back, seemed like the right call. Early on, she was good company in other ways too. We'd cook together, watch things, take long drives on weekends. She was funny when she was relaxed, which was genuinely often in those first months. The other times she was processing something that bothered her, something at work, something she'd read, some interaction that hadn't gone the right way. I didn't mind it. I've never needed constant calm around me. We seemed to fit well enough in those early months, went to a couple of concerts, drove somewhere for a weekend once, had people over for dinner a few times, normal things that feel significant when you're in them. I thought we were building something that could go somewhere. She had a few recurring themes that showed up both in her posts and eventually in our conversations. One was about ambition and how it gets treated differently based on gender. Another was about how men respond when women outperform them in any visible way. She'd started a series at some point about what she called fragile male ego syndrome. The core argument was that men who feel threatened by a successful woman will find ways to undercut her, consciously or not. She was passionate about it in the way people are when they genuinely believe what they're saying. I read several of those posts. They were well written, I'll give her that. She had a clear voice. The framing was always very clean, though the man in the stories was always the problem, always the one with the deficiency, always the one who needed to check himself. I never said that to her didn't seem like the right hill to die on. She had her perspective, I had mine, and we weren't dating each other's politics, so I kept quiet and let it go, and then kept letting it go, which established a kind of pattern where my silence read as agreement. I didn't realize that would matter as much as it did later on the second year of real estate, is when the grind actually starts producing something. The first year is just foundation work, whether you realize it or not. I'd made the calls, done the open houses, followed up obsessively when I had a warm lead, built a small reputation with the handful of clients I'd worked with referrals, started coming in with more regularity, not constantly, but enough that I wasn't starting from scratch every single month. There was one family in particular I'd been working with for a long time. By then they came through a referral from the couple I'd helped. At the end of my first year, husband and wife, 2 kids, very specific requirements, particular school district, particular feel to the neighborhood, particular style of house, the kind of clients that test your patience because the right property is genuinely hard to find. I showed them 16 or 17 places over several months. Some of the other agents in the office mentioned I was probably spending too much time on a picky buyer. I didn't really agree with that. Logic being specific about what you want doesn't mean you're difficult. It means I have to be specific about what I show you. So I got more precise about the listings I brought. Them stopped showing anything that didn't hit most of their actual requirements. Took longer to find options that way, but the options were actually worth seeing. One morning, I came across a listing that felt right in a way that's hard to explain, just matched the picture, in a way the other ones hadn't sent it to them, with a short note saying, "This might be the one." We went to look at it the next day, walked through the rooms. The husband checked the basement, the wife stood in the kitchen for a minute, then she started crying quietly. Not dramatically, just tearing up while looking at the layout. Her husband put his arm around her. I stepped back and let them have that moment when a buyer cries in the kitchen. You don't interrupt, you just wait. We put in an offer that afternoon. There was a competing offer already on the table. The listing agent told me we needed to move fast and come in strong. I worked through the terms with my clients. We structured the offer in a way that made it more attractive beyond just the price number, shorter inspection window, flexible close date. A few other things that made it cleaner on the seller's side. It went back and forth over a couple of days. Our offer was accepted. The place sold for just under $480,000. My commission after splitting with the brokerage was more money than I'd made in any single month since I started Not Life-Changing. But real, the kind of number that confirms you made the right decision. Getting into this, came home that evening and told her about it over dinner, walked through the whole thing. The family, the months of searching, the competing offer, how we won it. She listened, said the right words. "Congrats, that's great, you must be relieved." But something was slightly off in the delivery, like watching someone recite lines they had memorized without connecting to them. Then she started talking about the housing market, in general terms, said something about how home prices being where they are means a lot of families can't access certain neighborhoods, that the system creates and reinforces economic separation. I said I didn't disagree with that. As a general point, she said, it was just something worth being aware of when you work in an industry that benefits from it. I looked at her for a second, said, I helped a family find a home they loved after months of work. She said yes, and she wasn't criticizing me personally, just noting the structural context. I let it go. It was a good day, and I didn't want to spend it defending my profession to someone who hadn't asked to understand it, but that was the first time I noticed it. The way something good happening for me got redirected almost immediately towards something abstract and deflating. I filed it away and didn't make anything of it. Yet the next few weeks were steady, more showings, more follow-ups, a couple of smaller deals closing. She was working on a pitch to get a wellness brand to sponsor her page, asked me to look over the proposal. I read through it, suggested some language changes, helped tighten the pitch. She said the feedback was useful. Things felt okay during that stretch. Then I bought a different car, nothing extravagant, just practical. The Honda was at the point where my mechanic basically said any repair was throwing money away. Bought a used vehicle that was a few years newer, ran quietly, didn't shake when I hit highway speed. When she first saw it, she went quiet, said, "Oh, new car." I said, "Yeah, the old one was done." She nodded. Something moved through her face when she looked at it. I couldn't quite name it. But I noticed it that evening. She was a bit off shorter answers than usual, not really present in conversation. I asked if she was tired. She said a bit. I didn't push it. She did that sometimes. A few days later, things seemed fine again, and I forgot about it. Then about a week after that, a colleague called, while we were both home, called to congratulate me about a deal I'd been working on. She was in the room, could hear my half of the conversation. When I hung up, she asked who that was. I told her, someone from the office. She asked what it was about. I gave her the basics. She went quiet again. Same thing as before, but clearer this time. That evening she sat across from me and said she needed to say something. Said it was hard to put into words, but she'd try every time something went well with my work. She felt a kind of shrinking happen inside her. Said my success was making her feel diminished. She actually used that specific word, diminished. I asked her to explain what she meant by that. She said she worked hard too and wasn't seeing the same kind of results. Said being around someone who kept moving forward made her feel like she was standing still. I said I understood and was sorry. She felt that way, asked if there was something concrete she wanted from me, something specific I could do differently. She said she didn't know, she just needed me to understand. I said I did understand, told her. I thought she was talented and the results would come if she kept at it. She softened a little, said that was nice to hear. We moved on from it, but I sat with that conversation for a long time afterward. There was something in the logic of it that I couldn't quite accept, the idea that my doing well was something that happened to her, that my success had an effect on her feelings, that I was responsible for managing. I didn't say that out loud, just turned it over quietly and kept working. After that conversation, I pulled back on talking about work stuff at home, not completely but noticeably. If something went well, I'd keep it brief or skip it entirely, redirected conversations toward her projects, her ideas, what was going on in her world. She was still working on the brand pitch and it was moving slowly. Brands were responding but not converting. She was getting quietly frustrated about it. I listened when she brought it up, offered thoughts when she asked, tried to be actually useful. She started posting more frequently on her personal page during that stretch, a lot of content about what she called the invisible dynamics of ambition in relationships. One series was specifically about how people in relationships with high achievers experience a kind of ambient pressure that never gets acknowledged. Another was about how ambition can become a form of passive self-absorption, about how driven people center their own trajectory in shared spaces without even realizing it. She didn't tag me or reference our relationship explicitly, but I read every post and the framing wasn't hard to follow. I said nothing about it, didn't want to be the person who polices what his girlfriend posts about. So I stayed quiet and went back to work. Around that same time, I started paying serious attention to the commercial side of the business. There was a broker at the firm who had been doing commercial properties for most of his career: office buildings, retail spaces, light industrial, mid-sized developments. Completely different from residential real estate in almost every way the timelines stretch out. The due diligence is more involved. The clients are businesses and investors, not families. The commissions on a successful commercial deal can be 3 or 4 times what you'd see on a residential transaction of comparable work. He'd been watching how I operated for a while, started occasionally bringing me into conversations. Not in any formal capacity, more like, sit in on this call with me or come take a look at this building. You should know what you're seeing. I paid attention every time, started reading about commercial real estate, on my own, outside of work, different valuation methods, cap rates, lease structures, how to analyze a building as a financial asset, rather than just a location. This went on for several months. She knew I was busy, I was always busy, but I don't think she had a clear sense of what was actually developing in the background. I wasn't hiding it exactly. I had just stopped narrating my work life at home, because those conversations tended to go somewhere uncomfortable. Her content work hit a wall around the same time. The brand pitches weren't converting. Follower growth on her personal page had essentially stopped. She was posting at the same rate, but reaching fewer new people. I could see the frustration in how she talked about it. Not always directly, just in the undertone of things more irritable in general. Quicker to take something the wrong way. One evening she came home from a work meeting in a noticeably bad mood. Her company had brought in an outside consultant to assess their content strategy. He'd basically said that a significant portion of what she'd been doing wasn't producing results. Not harshly, apparently, just factually, she was upset about it. Said he had no understanding of what she was actually trying to do, that he was only looking at metrics. I listened, said, "That sounds frustrating." Then she asked what I actually thought. I made the mistake of saying that sometimes the metric view is worth taking seriously, even if it feels reductive. She looked at me, asked if I was taking his side. I said I wasn't taking anyone's side. I was saying data can be useful information. She said I sounded like every person who thinks success can be reduced to a number. I said I didn't think that. She said it felt like I did. I stopped talking. We ate the rest of dinner without much being said. She apologized later, said she was just stressed about work. I said it was fine. It wasn't exactly fine, but there was no productive version of that conversation. Left the commercial deal came through after a process that took longer than I expected. The broker had formally brought me in as co-agent on a mid-sized office building in a district that was getting redeveloped. The seller was motivated. The buyer was a development company that had been looking in that specific area for a while. The due diligence phase was involved. Environmental reports, lease reviews, title work, negotiations that went back and forth for weeks. I was in all of it. Learning as we moved, I sat in on calls. I barely understood at first and figured out what I was missing after asked questions when the broker wasn't on with clients. Took notes, put in the hours when it finally closed. My cut of the commission was more than I'd made in my entire first year. Combined, I want to be precise about what I'm describing here. I'm not trying to paint myself as someone who got rich fast. Commercial transactions just involve larger numbers, and the commission scale accordingly. The work is also genuinely more complex, so it's not like it came out of nowhere. I sat with the news for a couple of days before saying anything at home, thought about how the conversation would go, eventually told her over dinner. Kept it simple, said a commercial deal closed and it went, well, she put her fork down and asked how. Well, I told her, the rough number. She looked at the table for a moment, then said, "It was interesting how selling office buildings to developers paid more than most work that actually touch people's lives." I asked what she meant by work that touch people's lives. She said work that serve people directly rather than serving capital. I said companies employ people, and needing a functional place to operate is part of how that works. She said that was a particular way of looking at it. I said it wasn't particularly particular. It was just what I did. She went back to eating. I went back to eating. Not much else got said. A week or two after that, she found out about a dinner event the brokerage had put together for the commercial team. A restaurant, some of the agents, a couple of developer clients we'd worked with. I hadn't mentioned it to her because I had started treating work things as work things. She saw a photo that a colleague had posted and came and showed me. Her phone asked why I hadn't said I was going to something like that. I explained what it was, who was there, that it was a client dinner. She said the issue wasn't what the dinner was. Said the issue was that I seemed to have an entire professional world that she wasn't part of and didn't know about. I said she had her professional world too that I wasn't part of. She said that was different because her work didn't generate its own separate social life. That excluded me. I said this wasn't a social event. It was clients. She said the distinction didn't really matter. What mattered was she found out from a photo. I said I'd mention it next time. She said okay. I said okay. I knew it wasn't really about the dinner. There was a party at a friend's place not long after that group of people we both knew. Outdoor setting. Someone grilled. The usual kind of casual gathering. One of the guys there had been thinking about buying property for a while. He started asking me questions about how the market worked in our area. I answered what he asked. His girlfriend had a follow-up question about timing. I answered that too. Then someone else at the table joined in. It became one of those conversations that finds its own momentum. I wasn't putting on a performance. I was just talking about something. I actually knew when people asked. At some point I looked over and noticed she had stepped back from the group, slightly arms folded, not contributing, face doing something. I recognized I didn't stop the conversation to address it, kept going, answered what people brought up later. Someone turned to her and asked something about her content work. She gave a short answer and redirected the conversation to something else. Not rudely, just clearly done with the evening. On the drive home, she said very little. I asked how she felt about the night. She said it was fine. I said she seemed a bit disengaged toward the end. She said it's hard to stay engaged when a conversation stops being a conversation and becomes a consultation with one person. I said I didn't arrange for that to happen. Someone asked me something, and other people got interested. She said it always goes that way. I said I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do differently, not answer when people asked me things. She said she didn't have an answer for that. She just knew it didn't feel good. I didn't say anything else. We drove the rest of the way home without talking. The days after that had a specific kind of tension to them. Not a fight, not anything dramatic. Just everything slightly loaded. I'd say something normal and catch something in her expression. She'd respond and then go quiet. I started dreading the evenings in a way I'd never done before, in a relationship. She posted something around that time about the emotional weight of being with someone who doesn't recognize how much space they occupy. Didn't name me, didn't need to. I read it said nothing about it. Things continued like that for a while. She was still working on her content, still pitching, still frustrated at the plateau. I was working more than I had at any point since starting the commercial broker, and I had been having increasingly serious conversations about going independent together. The structure we kept coming back to was simple. He had the reputation and the relationships built over decades. I had the capacity and the drive to run something, day to day. He wanted to scale back eventually, not disappear, just operate at a different pace. The idea was he'd be a partner and advisor while I handled the operations. I was running numbers on my own. Thinking about it carefully, talking to a couple of people in the industry who I trusted, I didn't tell her any of this, not because I was hiding it. I had just stopped expecting those conversations to be ones I wanted to have. The fight that ended. Things happened on a regular weeknight. Nothing led up to it that day, or at least nothing unusual. She came home, set her things down, said she needed to talk. I said okay. She sat across from me and said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, said she cared about me, but the relationship had become something that felt like it was actively working against her. Said watching me build what I was building made her feel like she was losing ground on her own life. Then she said she needed me to slow down. I asked what that looked like in practice. She said fewer clients, less availability, stepping back from the commercial work for a while so that things could feel more even between us. I looked at her for a long moment, asked if she was seriously asking me to do less in my career so she could feel better about her results. She said it wasn't about doing less, it was about creating balance in the relationship. I said taking fewer clients and closing fewer deals was literally doing less. By definition, she said, I was being reductive. I said I was being accurate. She said I wasn't hearing what she was really saying. I said I heard exactly what she was saying, and I didn't agree with it. She said I was choosing ambition over the relationship. I said I wasn't choosing anything over anything. I was just not willing to deliberately underperform to manage her comfort level. She said that was a cold way to put it. I said I didn't mean it coldly. I meant it literally. She said what I was really communicating was that her feelings didn't matter to me. I said that wasn't what I said. She said it was what I meant. I said she couldn't tell me what I meant better than I could. We went back and forth, like that neither of us was shouting. It wasn't that kind of argument, more like two people talking at a wall. At some point she started crying, quietly, not dramatically. Just the kind of crying that comes from something being settled in a way you didn't want it to settle. I sat there and didn't immediately move toward her. Eventually said, I cared about her and wasn't trying to hurt her, but I was also not going to stop working, not going to slow down on purpose, not going to reshape what I was building around her emotional comfort. She said she needed time to think. I said okay. She went to the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that. Not doing much of anything. Things change after that night, not all at once, not dramatically, just the shape of it shifted. She stopped bringing up the big stuff. I stopped volunteering anything. We'd have dinner and talk about whatever was on in the background or what her friends were up to, surface level stuff. The kind of conversation you have with someone you're waiting something out with. I kept working, didn't change anything about how I was operating, didn't slow down, didn't hide results, didn't apologize for what was developing in my career. She kept doing her thing, posting, pitching, working. A smaller brand eventually said yes to one of her sponsorship pitches. Not what she'd been hoping for, but real. I congratulated her. She said thanks. That was the extent of it. Whatever warmth had been, there was operating on a low setting about 2 or 3 weeks after the big fight. She started packing some things methodical about it, not emotional. Some clothes, her laptop, a few books. Her chargers and cables said she was going to stay at a friend's for a while, needed space to think, without being in the same environment. I asked if this was her ending, things she said she didn't know yet. I nodded, carried one of her bags to the door without being asked. She stood in the doorway for a moment, longer than the situation required. I could feel what she was waiting for, some version of me that would break open and say everything she needed to hear some kind of statement that would give her a reason to stay. That felt like a win for both of us. I said, I hoped she figured out what she needed. She looked at me for a second, then left. I closed the door and stood in the hallway by myself for a minute, then went back to my desk and finished some work that was open. I'm not going to pretend the next few weeks were easy. They weren't having the apartment to yourself after sharing it with someone. It's a specific kind of adjustment. You get used to another person being around, even when things between you aren't good. Their absence is its own presence for a while. I went through the usual version of thinking too much about how everything unfolded, replayed conversations, wondered about things I could have said differently. There was a version of me that wanted to find the place where I made the mistake, where I said the wrong thing or misread something important. I looked for it, honestly kept coming back to the same conclusion. She asked me to do less, so she could feel like more. I can find a gentler way to frame it. But that's what actually happened, and I couldn't agree to it. Not because I don't have feelings, or because I'm incapable of compromise, but because I had spent years building something real out of nothing. And I wasn't going to quietly dismantle that, so someone could feel more comfortable with their own plateau, especially when that person was spending significant energy creating content about how men undermine women's success, while asking the man she was with to undermine his own. I noticed the irony. I kept it to myself. Work moved faster after that, genuinely, not as some kind of cope. I had more focus because I wasn't managing emotional weather every evening. The conversations with the commercial broker became concrete. We spent several weeks working through the actual specifics of what going independent would look like. Startup costs, risk assessment, which clients would come with us, timing. He was methodical about it, wanted to be sure we weren't moving too fast. I appreciated that about him. Eventually we agreed. The timing made sense. Filed the paperwork to form a small agency. Just the two of us and my assistant to start. Found office space that was small and functional. Not impressive, just real, a place to work from. That was ours. I remember the first morning we had keys to the place, 2 desks, a printer, bad overhead lighting, looked at it and thought, this is either the best or the dumbest thing I've ever done. Put together a basic website and started reaching out to existing contacts. The first several months of running the agency were genuinely difficult, in specific ways. New business has a particular kind of stress that's different from being an employee. Everything lands on you in a way that's hard to fully prepare for, even when you've thought about it. Cash flow is unpredictable. Deals take longer than projected. Expenses don't wait for a good month. There were weeks where I wasn't confident we'd break even, but the deals came, some through the broker's relationships, which were substantial. Some through mine, slowly. We built a pipeline that had some consistency to it. By around month 5 or 6, we had something that felt like a functioning operation. Not comfortable, but functioning. We added another assistant, started getting inquiries from people who found us without being referred. That last part was the signal I'd been waiting for. When people find you on their own, it means you've become something real rather than just a plan. I heard from her a couple of times during that stretch. Once she messaged, asking about a coat she thought she might have left at the apartment. I looked around, didn't find it, told her that was the whole conversation. A few months later, another message came. She said she'd been doing a lot of internal work since everything happened, that she'd grown from it and wanted to talk. If I was open to it, I read it, sat with it for a day. Thought about what talking would actually produce, couldn't land on anything. Wrote back something short. Said I was glad she was doing okay. She didn't respond after that. I put my phone down and went to look at a property that had just come to market. I'm writing this from a small office that has my name on the door. That's still a strange thing to look at. I'll be honest, I didn't expect to be here at this point when I started doing this. Real estate is not a fast track to anything. Most of it is sitting in empty houses on weekends, waiting for people who might not show a lot. Of it is calls that go nowhere and deals that collapse at the last minute over something stupid. It's paperwork and follow-up and managing expectations on every side of every transaction. None of it is glamorous, but it's mine in a way that matters. I built it from a beat-up Honda and a failed math exam, and 16 showings for a family who cried in a kitchen. I'm not going to tell you I have it figured out, or that things always go, well, they don't. Some months are genuinely rough, and some clients make you want to find a different line of work. I had a deal fall apart 2 months ago at the closing table over something that should have been resolved weeks earlier. Sat in a parking lot for about 20 minutes after that. One then called the client, explained what happened, started working on the next option. That's the job. You don't get to take losses personally, even when they feel personal. I learned that in year 1, and I'm still learning it. But I kept going. That's the only thing I know how to say about it. The relationship stuff, I've processed enough to not be running it on a loop. What happened was pretty simple. Once you strip it down, I was with someone who wanted me to be less so she could feel like more, and I wasn't willing to do that. Maybe someone reading this thinks I should have tried harder or been more flexible. I tried a few different versions of flexibility. I stopped talking about work. I listened to the frustrations. I gave real feedback when asked. I sat through the posts that were clearly about us and didn't say anything. I genuinely tried to make it work inside the constraints she was drawing. I just couldn't make those constraints into something that made sense long term, at some point. Trying to make yourself smaller, so the person next to you can feel bigger, just becomes something you shouldn't be doing. You can dress it in relationship language, call it balance or compromise or making space. But when someone is asking you to close fewer deals and take fewer clients so they feel less behind, that's not a relationship request, that's something else. And I wasn't the right person to give her that. So she left, or we ended, however you want to call it, and I kept working, woke up the next day and kept working. That's the whole thing.